Today, we embark on a journey which will take us 5 years to complete. So there's no time to waste. Engage. This is the review of champions, and I'm your host, Grandmaster. With me is a powerful panel made up of the finest champions Sakar has to offer. Or should I say crewmen? I don't know. Let me introduce them to you. Voice only, we have Loki's mom.
Hello, Commander Grandmaster.
And we have Mr. Lord Death Man as well. How are you?
Aye, sir.
And the man with the hat, Mr. Taylor First. How are you, man?
I am great.
That's good to hear. I hope we all live long and prosper. This is episode 1 of the Star Trek project, where we will be reviewing Star Trek. All of it. In order of release, sort of. And today we're going to talk about Star Trek, the original series, season 1, of course, episode 1. But before we do, I want to ask you all to help us out. Like and share this video and subscribe to our channel. And if you really can't get enough of us, we can recruit you into our own little Starfleet. Go to Sakar at sakar.freeforms.net, set up an account, get to know us, and you can join us in our reviews or podcast. We would love to have you on the show. As mentioned before, we will be discussing season 1 of Star Trek, the original series today. That's 30 episodes, so let's dive right into it. And I'm gonna start with somebody who saw it originally when it aired back in the day in 1966. Yes, the grand old lady of the review of champions, Lokismom. Can I ask you?
Yes, sir.
Do you have any specific episodes that really stood out to you besides the obvious ones, which we're no doubt going to talk about later, and why did they stand out to you?
One in particular was Charlie X, and it started. It was like close in the first 5 or 6 episodes of the first season, and the reason being the young actor by the name of Robert Walker Jr. And he was sort of at that time he had sort of blossomed into a popular star. He was on television, had been in several movies, and he was the son of the actor Robert Walker Sr., um, probably most famous for being in Hitchcock movies and just really great movies back in the 40s and 50s, but had a tragic death. But anyway, the, for some reason he sort of faded after that. That's by that time. I don't know what happened, whether he fell into the drug use or anything, but just for whatever reason, that I guess because I was just a kid, I was probably it's 1966, so I would have been 11 years old, 12 years old, and I just sort of had a big crush on Robert Walker Jr. So I guess that was stood out to me. But yeah, but even so, it was still a good episode. Going back and looking at it, because it really dealt with it was really starting to deal with a lot of themes that science fiction really hadn't up to that point. It had always been invasion and this and that and wars but then when it got out into outer space, and it was actually humans out there doing this, and then we were the invaders and stuff like that, and we were the ones trying to figure out what this universe is about. I think that's really when that show really started to kick in with me, because I think I was getting old enough to have some more complex thoughts than what a kid would have who would be watching a Saturday morning cartoon series. You know what I'm saying? And I didn't mean to take too long on that, but that, yeah, I mean, I was there. I was one of the original Trekkies, I guess, if you want to call it that. It was just me and my brother. He was a few years older than I, and we couldn't wait for that television show, because it had been advertised and whatever in the commercials, and we couldn't wait for that thing to start. And just we knew it, and we were hooked from the moment that TV show started.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, Charlie X. I remember it. I thought the guy was a little bit creepy, but that
He
was, of
was,
course,
yeah.
the
He
point.
played it real well.
Yeah. And of course, as Star Trek is, and it's not so much a show about the exploration of space. It's a show about the exploration of the human condition, and this dealt, of course, with adolescence and all that comes with that. Taylor, did you have a specific episode that stood out to you besides the obvious ones? And when I talk about the obvious ones, I mean episodes like Arena or The City on the Edge of Forever or Space Seed or stuff like that. One that's maybe not mentioned so much.
I could talk about all the episodes in depth. I know we have limited time, but since this is our inaugural episode, if you could just indulge me for just a couple of minutes.
I will.
Sci-fi television in the 1950s was characterized by things like Captain Video, Tom Corbett and his Space Cadets, Space Patrol, Flash Gordon. All great, but all very much aimed at very young children in the 1950s. In 1959, a show came along called Men into Space, which was actually a very good show. It was aimed at an older audience, although children, of course, could still enjoy it. And if you ever get a chance to see this show, Men into Space, it does a pretty good job of laying out the future of the space program. It just has it all happen way, way faster than it actually happened in real life. It was like first trip to the moon on one episode. The next episode, we got a space station. The episode after that, we're traveling to Mars. It just went a little bit faster than the real world. But anyway, a very good show. Also in 1959, though, science fiction on television took a huge leap forward with The Twilight Zone. Of course, very adult, very well written, very carefully written shows. And that opened up, of course, the 1960s. One Step Beyond was also in 1959. Thriller in 1960, which had sci-fi elements. But then throughout the 1960s, there was a wide range of science fiction. Over across the pond, of course, we had the Avengers, we had Doctor Who, we had Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea here in the United States, which was a very similar show to Star Trek, made by Irwin Allen. Of course, we had Lost in Space, another space opera. But as far as shows with sci-fi elements that were even close to the level of Star Trek as far as creativity and overall quality and storytelling, the first couple of seasons of The Man from U.N.C.L.E. is probably the closest thing to Star Trek prior to these 3 seasons right here. And then when Star Trek itself came along, of course, it's a milestone of science fiction television and the science fiction entertainment genre in general. And what strikes me most about the first season, what I enjoy most about watching the first season for the 10,000th time, is how it is so new at the time, and how they're building the airplane while in flight. They're creating this universe as they go along. So you can forgive some continuity errors, okay? Because they were writing these episodes on top of each other. They had a very strict schedule of getting them out. They had to produce them and get them out there. They had different people writing different episodes, and they hadn't decided exactly what it was all going to be, including the characters and the lore and all of that. So the first episode is where I really love to watch that happen. Now, the network made a mistake, which networks to this day are still making, and it aired the episodes out of order. So some things didn't make a whole lot of sense. For example, one of my favorite episodes is actually the pilot, which is Where No Man Has Gone Before, which is very different from the rest of the series. The uniforms are different, the technology is different, the way Spock behaves is somewhat different. But they didn't even show that as the first episode. They didn't show that until the 3rd episode, which maybe Loki's mom could touch on this. It must have been very confusing to audiences watching for the first time. They were wearing this uniform for 2 episodes, then they wore different uniforms, and then went back to the other uniforms the episode afterwards. So again, networks make silly mistakes and do silly things sometimes. I'm sure they had their reasons. But the first episode that aired, of course, was Man Trap, followed by Charlie X was the second one that aired, even though it was actually like the 8th produced. And the other thing you see while you're watching the first season, of course, the end credits, you see that they used scenes in the end credits from the episodes that they had. So as the season went on, they would have new episodes would be made and new scenes could be added to the closing credits. And as a child watching it in reruns in the 70s, one of my favorite parts was to see which picture was going to pop up during the closing credits. So again, there are very little continuity errors and things that didn't exist at one time. For example, the episode what's it called? Enemy Within, where Kirk goes in through the transporter and gets split into two people, and Sulu and his crew are down on the planet, trapped there. And people always say, well, why didn't they send a shuttle down to get them? Because shuttles hadn't been written into the show yet. They didn't know they had shuttles. The guy's writing the episodes, so that's why he was stuck down there and couldn't get saved until the end. And we'll talk about little things like that as it goes on. But again, little continuity errors. There was no YouTube back then where people making videos saying this is the most horrible thing I've ever seen in my life because they didn't use a shuttle to pick up Sulu in last week's episode. They didn't have any of that type of feedback. All they had was the ratings. All right. The other thing that strikes me about season 1 and the whole show in general is just how beautifully it's made on the budget. The use of the music, the orchestra, and the lighting and the shadows, and it's like a master class in how to use lighting and shadow and music to set tone and to create emotion. It's just so beautifully done. Like in that example I just gave, the Enemy Within. When we're looking at evil Kirk, they got that super close up with that light on his eyes, and he's got just a little bit of eye makeup to make him look a little bit more fierce and evil. Mm-hmm. And William Shatner was always at his best when he was allowed to cut loose and get outside of his normal professional Captain Kirk character. Mm-hmm. All right, so that's one of my favorite episodes there. I like Charlie. The creepy part about Charlie X was the way he became obsessed with Yeoman Janice Rand. Mm-hmm. Oh my God, you used the exact word. Wow, creepy. And the actor, I hand it to Robert Walker. Good actor. He really is a good actor, and he did a great job of playing that creepy character. Another good thing about that episode is Kirk. We see Kirk get out of his comfort zone a little bit. There's that scene where Bones is trying to get him to be a father figure, and Kirk doesn't know how to be a father figure. He's very uncomfortable. He doesn't know what to do. He tries to get Bones to do it. So that's another thing I like. These characters are not always perfect. They're not always in control. They're not always in charge. Another theme you see throughout the show is they're not, like I said, they're not perfect. Sometimes they learn lessons from the aliens they encounter, and sometimes the aliens learn lessons from the humans. And I like that sometimes we can learn from them, and sometimes they can learn from us.
And may I add that
absolutely,
this crew was not really concerned with the Prime Directive in season 1, because they have been changing up alien worlds left and right.
Right. Well, the Prime Directive hadn't been invented yet. In fact, it wasn't mentioned until Return of the Archons, which was near the end of the season. Was the first time that they mentioned the. That's a good episode. Talk about creepy characters. All right. Return of the Archons. My favorite scene is when they first beam down and they meet that guy on the street. You guys remember Return of the Archons, the one where Landru, the computer, is controlling everybody. They meet that guy on the street, and what a creepy guy. Come for the festival, eh? Yeah? Your daddy can put them up, Annie. Oh my God! Get away from me! Don't touch me!
and don't be a woman when the clock strikes 6. But anyway,
exactly.
Lord Deathman, you are like me, a little bit younger, and we literally saw Star Trek on a later age, or a later date, when actually we were already seeing Battlestar Galactica and stuff like that on TV, which of course had a higher production value than the first few seasons of Star Trek, but still Star Trek unmatched in my view. How about you? Did you have any specific episodes you want to talk about which you absolutely love, besides the obvious one? And we're going to talk about those in a minute.
Yeah. Well, I have to start this conversation off by saying I did not have the privilege of seeing first run Star Trek when it was originally on TV. That must have been a really great experience, just given the historical context and being able to watch the show kind of unfold in real time as the world was being created, and they were resolving things like this is a shuttlecraft and this is how our transporters work and this is how warp speed actually goes and these are what the uniforms look like. But I discovered like a lot of people, I discovered Star Trek the original series in syndication. And actually I had watched Star Trek The Next Generation. That was my childhood show of Star Trek. And then older folks in your life, including my dad, would be like, I think there was an older version of this on TV that you should check out that kind of, lines up with all of this. And at the time, I was trying to explore a lot of older TV shows from that era because a lot of them were in reruns at the time. And none of it really stick. I think I watched a little bit of like Lost in Space, and there was a show called The Time Tunnel, and I was like, okay, I don't think I really get this. And but then I saw Star Trek, and the very first episode that I saw, not in chronological order for the series, because the shows were just running, I think, in any order, like late at night if you caught it on TV. And it's still my favorite from the season one that we're discussing, and it might be my favorite of the entire show. It's called Where No Man Has Gone Before. Um, and it's about the idea of ESP. We have a Starfleet officer who comes into contact with a phenomena essentially that gives him these godlike powers. And Kirk, McCoy, and Spock and the rest of the crew are trying to work out keeping up with this guy and eventually confronting him in a physical confrontation on a desolate planet. Who knows why there's no one on the planet, but not a lot of people there. And this guy's powers are growing exponentially, and that just seemed like such a high concept idea. And the weird things that they did with their eyes, like when I was a kid and I saw the contact lenses that kind of made their eyes sparkle, I was like, this is crazy. It's like what have they done? Are they like, did they really make them not human? But Mitchell, who is the officer, ends up Gary Mitchell, I believe, a lieutenant commander, if I remember the rank correctly. He ends up gaining these telepathic and telekinetic powers, and really becomes less and less associated with the human experience. As he gets these powers, human beings begin to seem like unimportant, insignificant creatures. And I don't really sense malevolence in it. He may have like a grudge with Kirk, but his grudge really isn't with the human race. He's like on his way up to another level. And humans are kind of like in the way of that evolution. And I just never seen anything that high concept in science fiction before, especially against the backdrop of like this spacefaring armada that was doing peacekeeping missions all over the galaxy. It just seemed like a really incredibly detailed and fleshed out world that I was immediately able to connect with and immerse myself in. And let's not forget Sally Kellerman, I believe, is the actor who played Elizabeth, and I forget her last name, Denner, I think, who also gains this ESP. She was a babe, so that kept me watching too. And
Yeah.
her ascension and her different experience with her ESP powers, like the laser beams that they try to get this guy, seeing Kirk's grave. It was a pretty like, to a younger person, a lot happened in this episode, and it was just incredibly action packed and again incredibly well drawn out. And I immediately wanted to see more from this universe. And I was like, okay, like how do you get to see all these episodes at one time? This was before like DVDs and things like that were eponymous and readily available everywhere. But I do remember the ending of the episode, but before I just start rambling on more about it, they eventually beat him, and Danner kind of comes in to help save the crew from Mitchell, and he eventually loses his powers. I think they drop a rock on him if that's what happened to him. Like somebody phased it off the top of a cliff. It might have been Spock or Kirk, and it fell on the guy and it killed him. And I remember, when you're young, like bad guys and good guys, it's all pretty simplistic. It's black and white. But what really stood out to me was that Kirk and Spock, when they're having this conversation about Mitchell, there's really no ill will towards him. They're not treating him like a villain or, like this kind of mustache twirler. They're really interested in preserving his reputation as a as a Starfleet officer. And they're thinking about the good aspects of his service and how he essentially became this victim of this really wild and kind of bizarre accident. And that really stuck with me, that kind of emotional maturity that you get in Star Trek, where people aren't like, like TV today and a lot of dramatic scenarios on television are about climbers, ambitious people, drama that's set against like jealousies and all this kind of, conflict that comes with the baggage of just being human. But these guys were just so cool about it. They were just so mature, even though they like almost died trying to stop this, But I remember specifically a line where I think it was Kirk who said, you know what, he didn't ask for what happened to him, and that really brought me into the show as it being this kind of inclusive and place where it's like, oh wow, this is a real vision of what human beings could be like in the far future, and it really stuck with me. So
we wouldn't be reviewing Star Trek, the original series, without mentioning Gene Roddenberry, the creative mind behind all of this. His vision of the future is a hopeful one, and let's hope that one day we will get there, because basically that's what appealed me the most about Star Trek. It's an optimistic view of of humanity and what we could be, and hopefully we will be one day. Although we have a long way to go.
Can I just bouncing off what Lord Deathman said? I can't remember if it was that particular episode that he's referencing, but there's at one point I think something happens, and they had several where they're in a Garden of Eden like thing, and then they have to bust it up, and but at the sort of at the end when you have the Spock and Kirk are philosophizing, Spock says something about, or it may even been Dr. McCoy about the loss of the Garden of Eden. And then, Kirk leans on the railing. He says, I don't think humans were meant to live in the Garden of Eden, but we were supposed to. And then he goes on into some speech about, the frontier and all that. But that sort of was like it's not, the world's not perfect. Yeah, we're not going to have a Garden of Eden, but we can make it a better world. We can try to at least improve the savagery. We can make things better. I think that's what you're talking about, Grandmaster.
Yeah, and same here. That's really what stood out to me. This active sort of attempt to say we can make the world better.
Absolutely. Of course.
And during I don't mean, I'm sorry to interrupt, but remember that was 1966, and what was happening in the United States during that time, in the world, really, not just in Vietnam, the Civil, everything. I mean, the turmoil. I think Dr. King, certainly JFK had already been assassinated, and I think maybe King and Bobby Kennedy were yet to come. But when you consider the circumstances we were in, and then that's what I was referencing in my life versus watching this Star Trek, and how things can be better. We can work together. And I think that's really Roddenberry wanted. He was a very liberal minded person, however you want to take that. But that was his vision. And he put it out there as best he could. And I think others have certainly picked up the ball and ran with it.
Yeah. When you talk about things that were happening in the 1960s, A Taste of Armageddon comes to mind. The episode where they wage a war between two planets based on computer-generated kills and people step into a machine because that's more efficient, so your culture can be preserved. That is, of course, a Cold War a reference right there, quite obvious. But wasn't that obvious when it aired back then?
Yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah. He pushed the boundaries a lot. I mean, that show was very controversial. Um, we tend to forget that because we look at it now and it seems pretty mild. But back then, woo, some of the themes he touched on. And my dad was and my dad loved that show. He loved Star Trek. Talking about our fathers and how they love sometimes they love the same things we do. But ooh, he was like he was Mr. Nixon could do no wrong type of guy.
Mhm.
And so he really he had trouble sometimes and he would have to get up and walk out of the room. But to his credit, he never prevented my brother or myself from watching his TV show.
Okay. Well, yeah, I can imagine. Some things must have been controversial. I mean, Gene Roddenberry put a black woman in a position of power on a show. I mean, that I can only imagine how that must have been back then, shocking as it was. But
It was.
what we're not going to do while we're reviewing Star Trek, especially not with the original series, is put our current day morale on that show, because otherwise you could make a remark about Klingons and stuff like that and some female uniforms. But let's not do that. The women of the 1960s, I love them. They look absolutely amazing.
Charlie X had Kirk in some red tights and no tops. So now, come on, they did a little beefcake too.
Kirk took his shirt off like every other episode in the first season. He had shirtless all the
taking
time.
clothes off and getting out of beds.
Yeah. Okay, Star Trek. When you say Star Trek, you say Klingons. And actually, what I didn't remember, but when I rewatched it, I noticed it. They did not introduce the Klingons until almost the very end of season 1 in episode called Space Seed, I think it was. Yeah, Space Seed.
It was Errand of Mercy.
Errand of Mercy.
It was Errand of Mercy. Yeah.
Yeah, Space Seed was with. I get my episode names mixed up. I'm sorry. Errand of Mercy. It was almost the last episode of the first season. The villains or the other empire they introduced earlier is, of course, the Romulan Star Empire, which is introduced in episode which was actually later referenced in Strange New Worlds, as I think it was. And was it called Balance of Terror? Balance of Terror, yeah. Which was actually quite shocking to me that they started with a wedding ceremony, which never got to be in the end. Taylor, what did you think of the introduction of both the Romulans and the Klingons in Star Trek, the original season 1?
Yeah, Balance of Terror is one of the best episodes of the whole series, as far as I'm concerned. It just brilliant. Of course, it was greatly inspired by the movie The Enemy Below, which was a World War II submarine movie with Robert Mitchum. But they took that theme and they applied it, of course, to the Star Trek universe, and it was, I mean, that's just a brilliant episode. And of course, the actor playing the Romulan commander, who of course is the same actor who later plays Spock's father, by the way. But in this role, he was brilliant and so relatable. And you know how him and Captain Kirk, were kind of having a chess match, and grew to respect each other so much during the whole battle, the whole situation. And that another thing about that episode is Kirk really feeling the weight, the pressure, how his decisions, his actions could lead to an intergalactic war and cost millions of lives if he did the wrong thing, and he really struggles with it, which is again brilliant writing and brilliant acting by William Shatner. So yeah, now for the Klingons, Errand of Mercy, the first Klingon commander there was played by I believe his first name is John Kalikos, who reprised the role in DS9 many years later, and he also played the original Gaius Baltar in the original Battlestar Galactica series. So he's nerd royalty as far as I'm concerned at that point. But that's a very interesting episode too, because the people on the planet there, I can't remember the name of the planet, but they're not people, they're just facsimiles of people to make the spacefarers, think they're not dangerous and just leave them alone and go away.
Weren't
But
those
there's a
people
war
called Organians?
Organians, thank you. Yeah, I think that was it. But there's this war brewing between the Federation and the Klingon Empire, and Kirk and Spock don't want to go to war. You can tell, they want to avoid war, but they also don't want these people to be enslaved. They don't want the I don't even remember if they were using the word Federation at that point. At one point, they called it the United Earth Federation and stuff. So again, building the aircraft while in flight. The United Federation of Planets, I don't think even gets mentioned until season 2.
No, it was mentioned in season 1. It was mentioned.
Was it mentioned? I think towards the end, maybe the end of season 1. But anyway, there was this war brewing, and they feel they have to take action to protect these poor people who actually don't. They keep saying, we don't need your protection, we're fine, but they don't believe them. And of course, those people decide they're not going to let a war be fought over them. They're not going to be the cause of a war between these two, and they end it. But the establishment of the Klingon Empire, and we'll talk, when we go through other iterations of this franchise. In the original series, the Klingons are quite human. Okay, they're not as alien as they later become, in my opinion, in the later iterations. He talks about how they talk about how the Klingons invade planets and enslave them, but the Klingon shoots back. Well, you cut off our trade, you strangle our shipping routes and things like. There's some back and forth there. There's legitimate, at least from their point of view, grievances between both parties. So again, it's just the writing and everything. A quick mention. When you watch the credits of this show, you'll see the name DC Fontana show up all the time, usually as script supervisor. DC Fontana was a woman. She, I don't care if you saw Mad Men. Women actually did have jobs and do actual important stuff in the 1960s. They didn't just get coffee, okay? And she was kind of like, Gene Roddenberry's right-hand man. She was the one overseeing a lot of the shows, and she continued with the franchise for a very long time. So she did a great job. But yeah, both the Romulans and the Klingons, of course, they were so powerfully established in this first season that, of course, they kept bringing them back for the whole lifetime of the franchise.
Mm-hmm. Lord Death Man, any thoughts on this?
Well, I will say that while Taylor's absolutely right about DC Fontana and her contribution to Star Trek, it is noteworthy that she did have to use the name DC instead of Dorothy to kind of just to obscure the fact that she was a woman as a science fiction writer. A lot of women of the day felt that they had to do that because it did feel like a boys' playground in terms of writing sci-fi novels and so forth and so on.
They actually make comments on this morale in DS9 in I think, was it Far Beyond the Stars or something like that, where they went that the Nana Visitor's character in that episode also had to write under an alias because a woman couldn't be a science fiction writer.
Right. It was thought that a woman as a science fiction writer would never sell, that people just wouldn't buy work produced by a woman. And DC Fontana did live long enough to see that episode and the obvious homage to her in it. I don't think she passed away until 2019. So huge hero of mine, DC Fontana. So I just wanted to say a few words about her. But I think to add a little bit more to the discussion, I know we're trying to put this into the historical context and understand how great the show was and just how well developed it seemed to be out of the box. But I thought it would be interesting to share some of the odd misconceptions that I had about the show watching it as a younger viewer. And this is probably going to embarrass me, really, put me on the spot here. But I think I watched the show like half of the first season thinking that Mr. Spock was Chinese and not understanding that he was an alien from another planet. I just assumed that he was from China. I didn't realize that they were on a ship. I thought they were just like on some base and that they used the transporter like to get from one planet to the next. I also was only vaguely aware that it was the future. I thought, okay, is this happening now? And like this is like a secret organization and they have like all this high tech stuff. So I say all that to say that it did take me a while to sort of like understand how the whole universe works and what the rules were, because there are a lot of different moving parts that Gene kind of came up with. And I think the trouble of understanding, for me at least, that it was the future was one, because I was young and not paying attention as closely as you should. And two, they had star dates. And I was like, okay, I don't know what that means. Like, what day is it? So I thought it was kind of happening right now, as in the right now of the 1960s when it was made, and not like the 80s, 90s when I had seen it for the first time. So I struggled with a lot of little details like that, not understanding that people were alien and basically thinking they were deformed or things of that nature. But I do want to say a few words about the Klingon introduction, which, again, when you watch TV from this era, it's pretty black and white who are the bad guys and who are the good guys. And the good guys always have to put a beat down on the bad guys, and that's how TV was done back then. For the most part, I'm not going to make a blanket generalization because I obviously didn't live through that era. But at the end of Errand of Mercy, we see the Organians kind of step in between the conflict between Earth and the Klingons. And it could have been very much a sort of Kirk has to beat these, villainous literal mustache wearing Klingons and like put them in the dirt. But the Organians step in and say, look, there really isn't going to be a conflict here today. We're not going to allow that to happen. And they make this bold prediction that, it makes your heart sing as a Star Trek fan, that the prediction that they make in that episode actually gets paid off like decades later in the next generation when Klingons and humans become allies and work together towards common goals. At least till you get to Deep Space Nine, with it, before they start fighting again.
Yeah.
And again, like it's really hard to articulate how different that those ideas were in terms of like presenting ideas that were just like not about, hey, look, I'm just going to shoot this guy because it's a Western, he's going to die, and then we're not going to worry about him after that.
Yeah. Lokismom, those star dates, by the way, I know in later shows they actually do a nice chronological order of the star dates, but in season 1 of the original series, they went back and forth. At least when you watch them in order. But that those got fixed as well. The clocks on the Enterprise were not really aligned at the moment. But anyway, Lokismom, do you have any thoughts about the Klingons and the Romulans as they were introduced in season 1 of the original series?
Yeah, they really became the big baddies of, I think, of the whole Star Trek, because they ran throughout they would have them in different episodes as opposed to just one big baddie and they defeat him and we never hear from him again. Yeah, I think what stands out is how the Klingons and the Romulans, while bad guys, were never depicted as totally evil. There was a rationale behind why they were doing, why they were fighting, why all the things that they were doing, trying invading other planets, enslaving people. But it wasn't good to what the humans, even the humans in the future, what they wanted for the universe. But it's at least some understanding was given to them. yeah, I think really during that time, remember this was also when they had westerns were big, still going strong. And of course, it was always either if it wasn't bandits and train robbers, it had to be Indians, American Native Americans. And so I think that got to by the 1960s. I think people were starting to get a little squeamish with that. Oh yeah, yeah, we need to start rethinking our entertainment value here. And so that's I think when the aliens, these non-humans could then fill that role and be and if we had to go and slaughter them all, fine.
Mhm.
It's all science. They're not real.
And it was, of course, Gene's way to say, "Hey, look, our enemies are humans too.
Yeah.
That's why the villains are not depicted like evil. I mean, the
Hmm.
enemies of the West or the U.S. or how you
Hmm.
want to see it, they are humans too.
And
Russians, Soviets were humans.
right,
That's
right. Then you're right, and you bring up the fact that was our big villain in 1966. That ooh, Russia to Soviet Union. We had nukes pointed at each other, Failsafe and Doctor Strangelove, and all those kinds of those stories were also being told. Um, and so, and to science fiction, I think, aside from just being, a way to redo cowboys and Indians in space, is, like I say, we can cast a lot of stuff on it and feel our way through it. Um, Another thing that was real popular back in that late 60s period were disaster movies. And it was theorized that the reason these movies were becoming so popular was because it was a way for the audience to go through a disaster and survive it and then come out at the other end of it and say, oh, and so I think in a lot of ways that Star Trek did that for us. It worked through these problems that we were going through in society at that time in a non-serious way, in a fantasy way. And I'll just one thing, and I'll point out to Taylor. Yes, there were DC Fontana, who could not use her real name, was writing scripts. She was one of the few women doing it. Also, if you notice on Star Trek, Uhura was sitting in the back pressing buttons, and the rest of the women were carrying clipboards around and getting coffee. So it wasn't like that. It was very reflective of how the women's status was at that time. Very much so. As it changed, we saw it change into the other Star Trek series when women were being brought in, being more executive roles, executive parts, important, more important to the story than just a love interest,
mm.
and stuff like that. So yeah, yeah, but all due respect to Taylor, I understand where he's coming from, but it's not as rosy as he wants to believe it. I'm
We
sorry.
did
No,
have number one.
yeah, exactly. And let's just face it, the fact that Huro was sitting there pressing buttons was already a very big step at the time.
Yeah, it
As I
was. It
understand it, I
was.
didn't live
Yeah.
through those times, but I understand that it was. So, and it was a black woman. I think even Martin Luther King persuaded Nichelle Nichols, by her own account, that to remain on Star Trek because it was very important that she was there.
And also,
So
if you're the first pilot, which was integrated later into
two-parter the
anthology, yeah.
menagerie, yeah.
But the original pilot to start Jeffrey Hunter and had oh golly, what's Roddenberry's wife's name? Oh
Michelle Berry.
Michael Bay.
Nigel.
yeah, Majel Badgel.
So
Bless her
apparently
heart.
there's three ways to pronounce her first name.
Always the queen of Star. She is the true queen of Star Trek. Anyway, she played number one. She was the right hand man, quote unquote. But when they came around to do the second pilot, they had to put Leonard Nimoy into the part. So anyway, just let you know.
Yeah. Taylor, you had a follow-up.
Yeah, just to follow up on that first. Yes, this show did do a lot of things with women, even though they couldn't have Majel Barrett as number one. Uhura, several times in the first season, Uhura gets told to take over navigation. She goes down to the front seat. She serves as navigator at certain times as well. And of course, in the episode Court Martial, there's a woman lawyer, prosecutor. So the women, and throughout the whole series, the women step up, and that's great because
Well, women
it
step up,
wasn't
Taylor,
as
but what I'm
prevalent.
saying is that women stepped up is not an equalizer.
No.
It's just
Well,
not
to
an
a degree, it is
equalizer.
because it wasn't as prevalent back then
Well,
as it is now, obviously.
it was a
So this
step.
was
It
making
was a step
steps in the right direction.
that a
One
lot
at a
of
time,
people
please.
that a lot of people didn't like at the time. That a lot of people didn't like. What's the woman doing? My brother did not like the fact that Ahura was even that a black woman was even on there. I wish they would get rid of Ahura. He would say because he just didn't like seeing her back there. That happened. The people said stuff like that. Taylor, I'm sorry. Eh, I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
Well, I think I
The
think it would be
reality
fair.
is different from what you're wanting to paint it as.
Yeah. But
Well,
Lord Deathman, yeah.
I was just going to say, I think it would be fair to say that the executive leadership of the studio at the time was very much sexist. I think that would be safe to say, or at least they were thinking in very capitalist interest in that. We just don't feel like people are ready to see women in high ranking positions on the show. But Gene Roddenberry, I think it would be safe to say he was a bit more progressive, and he wanted to push the agenda of putting women
Yeah.
into
Yeah,
important
absolutely.
places.
I think
So
Gene Roddenberry did emancipation of women a lot of good in that regard, and he absolutely wanted to go faster than the network would allow him. That's quite obvious after the pilot
Absolutely.
and what happened, and I understand where you're coming from, Loki's mom. I mean, equality or equity or how you want to see it is always prevalent, but you always have to see things have to progress, and you need to start somewhere. And you cannot deny that Gene Roddenberry
Oh, I'm not. Absolutely. We said
progressed
that from the
its
very beginning. We
made a
said
lot
that
of
from the very
progression.
beginning.
Okay, Taylor, do you have any more?
Well, yeah, the actual reason that I raised my hand was previously we talked about the clocks, and I just wanted to mention that the episode "The Naked Time" was actually the first reference to time travel in the entire series. And the episode wasn't even anything to do with time travel. It was the episode where they got this virus and they all started acting crazy all over the ship, and the ship was in danger of running into a sun or a planet or something. And in order to get out of it at the very end, they had to go so fast that they actually snapped back in time. And it was just kind of mentioned like at the final scene. Oh yeah, we're 2 days earlier than we were or something like that. But anyway, that was the first time time travel was ever mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
And of course it comes back multiple times throughout the whole series. And at that time it was just considered for them, it was considered theoretical until they did it.
Yeah. Okay, Lord Deathman. There are 3 more episodes I want to discuss, and those are, of course, you can have a discussion about it, and we will by now, because now maybe Taylor will whip my ears or Loki's mom, but I will start with you. There are 3 episodes that are considered among the most iconic of all of Star Trek, and that we absolutely need to discuss. The first one is Arena, the second one is Space Seed, and the third one is The City on the Edge of Forever. I mean, I think those 3 episodes, beside the ones we already discussed, absolutely stand out. Space Seed is, of course, the introduction of Khan Noonien Singh. Arena is the iconic fight between Kirk and the Gorn on the planet. And of course, The City on the Edge of Forever is, of course, where they meet the Guardian of Forever, and they have to go back in time to stop McCoy from preventing the Nazis to win the Second World War or something like that. Yeah, it sounds way out there, but when you see the episode, it actually makes sense. Lord Deathman, what are your feelings on those 3 episodes?
Wow, those are definitely iconic episodes of Star Trek. And again, for this series, I wanted to use it as an opportunity to really go back to my first impressions of seeing Star Trek, which again are a little ignorant and uninformed. But I was really struggling to what really brought me into this, because now I can quote you, title and verse about the historical context and what was going on at the time and what was going on with the actors. But yeah, all three of those episodes, I think the one that stands out to me, and I hate to play it so safe, but it is the City on the Edge of Forever, because that again just hugely epic in terms of sci-fi concepts. This Guardian of Forever, this doorway that takes you into different times. That was really a transportive episode, and not to mistake that for the device, the transporter, but it really immersed you into it. Of course, I'm going to get on my soapbox just for a minute here to talk about the kind of assault that we're experiencing on world building and lore and canon in these franchises. You have a lot of modern day Star Trek writers or writers from big franchises that have been around for a long time that just feel like, you know what, we don't really have to pay attention to all of that stuff that came back in the past. It kind of holds us up from just telling great dramatic stories. We can forget about how these things lined up historically. But I have to say, a part of Star Trek's appeal is that it did do such massive world building and created this like interconnected before the MCU, and all of that kind of stuff that made it feel like you were in one galaxy that was continuous, and it made sense the way it was laid out. So the City on the Edge of the Forever is an exquisite example of world building and just taking the stakes up to this whole new level on a TV show. I'm like, okay, they got to figure out how to get World War II to actually happen, not to stop it, but to get it to happen for the sake of the future that they live in was like my basic understanding of the episode as a child. And those ideas just really blew my mind. I mean, Arena, I look at that episode and I say, that's about one-on-one sort of, mano-y-mano, fisticuffs episode. You've got to find a way to outsmart this incredibly powerful being in a one-on-one fight. You don't have all of the futuristic toys that you could lean on. I don't think he has a phaser. He doesn't have anything that could put this villain down quickly. So it was just kind of exciting as a young person to watch that, just to see how the fight would unfurl. But even as a kid, again, I'm talking late 80s, early 90s, I'm watching this stuff and I'm like, okay, this does look a little dated in terms of the costume and the way the guy is moving. That this isn't really credible. But the story behind the struggle was incredibly credible. The stakes of the fight really kept me invested in Arena, even though I thought, the way it looked was a bit dated when you put it up against any typical sci-fi movie of the era. And then, of course, Space Seed. My God, that's another banger. Hard to put into words how great that episode is, and Ricardo Montalban doesn't really get a lot of credit for what he brought to the depiction of Khan. Not only is this kind of uber macho villain who was clearly mentally and physically superior than the people he was going up against, but he gave that character so much personality and so much depth just in the space of that one episode. I felt like I want to join Khan in his mission because the dude was just so damn cool. I just remember these little moments. There's I just want to bring up two moments from the episode that have always stood out for me seeing it as a kid. There's a moment where Khan is trying to escape his quarters and he has to overpower two guards that are outside, and he's obviously up against a hydraulic door that no normal human could move out of the way. But he does this quick meditation, like he puts his hands together and kind of like concentrates for a moment to kind of will himself to build up the strength to manually move this door. And then the minute he's out of the door, he springs on the two guards and takes them out quite easily. That has always stuck with me as just a really great moment and choice in acting. I don't know if that little prayer thing was in the script, but it was beautifully rendered by Ricardo. And then there's the big fight that Kirk has with Khan, kind of I think it's in engineering or some lower decks part of the ship, and it's an all-out battle. Kirk is desperate to try and hold his own against Khan, but clearly he's up against his physical better. And Khan is he stops the fight for a moment just to tell Kirk how hopeless things are. He's like, dude, I have 5 times your strength. And you can tell Khan just wants him to submit. Like he doesn't want to kill Kirk. He's like, I just want you to join me. And again, that's just this more advanced and progressive thinking that always kind of stood out to me, making this a cut above a lot of other episodic television that you'd be watching in terms of how something like that would typically play out.
Yeah.
But yeah, Khan, again, he doesn't get killed. He doesn't, no one says, dude, you're real evil, or they say, look, here's a planet for you to tame with this incredibly frontier spirit that you have. And things, I don't know. I wasn't there to watch all the television of the era, but it felt like I didn't see a lot of that kind of resolution that was so mature on television than the way you would get it with Star Trek.
Yeah, they actually part amicably in a
Yeah,
way.
yeah.
So yeah, that amazed me as well, because when we get to talk in a few months, we will discuss the Wrath of Khan, of course, and then we will revisit this character. And I remember that movie beginning quite differently. But anyway, Lokismom, any thoughts from you on these 3 episodes, which are still being talked about today by us, by the way?
Yes, Gorn. He's he's become quite popular. I think he and William Shatner, I think, made Super Bowl commercials a few years back. I think that was stuff like that's a lot of fun. When they bring oh god, it kind of like slaps you. It's a nice way, a nice slap in the face. But anyway, yeah, Gorn, I don't remember too much about. I know at the end it was like the Metron guy or whatever. He says, "Well, you showed this guy mercy, and therefore you're more advanced." And that was another overriding theme where it would be this higher power would be judging humans against what they do to the aliens and whatnot. I think as far as the other 2, I remember quite well. Space Seed was the one with Ricardo Montalban, which then morphed into the great movie, which we will be reviewing at some point, The Wrath of Khan. And yeah, he was just really good. He really stands out and just steals every scene. And then, of course, I think this was when they sort of, I'm not sure, this may have been referenced in an earlier episode, but where they talk about Earth had a war at some point and things had really gotten bad, and then worse than what they were in 1966. And then Star Trek is what later became, several hundred years later, things got better. Yeah, I think that maybe Taylor can help me on that one. That if that was when they first, but then they referenced that several times, so we really got the idea that things on Earth are not going real well in 1966, so you better watch out. Yeah, then we get to the city, The Edge of Tomorrow, which was written by Harlan Ellison. And now, if you've ever seen, I'll reference a TV show that came before Star Trek called The Outer Limits, which I'm sure Taylor's well aware of. And it was an anthology series. It was not a dedicated, like a serial series. But Star Trek really used they took a lot of stuff. I think that some of those blown up heads that was actually came from the Outer Limits set. Mr. Spock's ears, I think David McCallum had actually worn a version of them before that in an episode. But Harlan Ellison wrote an episode called oh golly, I think it's called The Demon with the Glass Hand, which also deals with time travel, and it's a very good episode. If you ever just get a chance to, probably can get it on YouTube with stars Robert Culp. And So I think Harlan Ellison sort of bounced off of that same theme as far as going back. How do you go back and affect the future? If you go back into the past, will you alter the future? And of course, that's what had happened. That Spock and Kirk have to go back to the past to, as it winds up killing the woman that the love of Kirk's life as usual, and he falls in love with her, and he has to let her die, and it's that and it's that. They let her die. I mean, when did they start doing stuff like that? And in TV that was meant for kids or for families. Not it wasn't. They did it in adult drama, but killing off the love interest, that was just very heartbreaking, and it was played real well too. The way they did it, very intelligent episode. And of course, I think Ellison had some problems, and as usual, he's a big mouth or perhaps he's passed away now. I shouldn't speak ill of the dead, but caused a lot of problems. And yet, I think that is probably one of the, if not the most remembered or most important episode of the entire 3-year run of Star Trek.
Mm.
And I got a little trivia. I'll throw it Taylor. I'm going to see if he gets it.
Well, I'm moving to Taylor, so throw
okay. Taylor, what was the first TV show or movie that referenced Star Trek?
Oh wow, I do not know.
Okay, well, I think you would. And I can't. I should have looked up the episode myself, but it's actually on the Dick Van Dyke Show. And it was I think it was probably would have been the last year that the Dick Van Dyke Show was on, and I can't remember how it comes about, but for some reason Rob Petrie is talking to himself, and he says, "Gee, I wonder what Mr. Spock would think of that, or I wonder what Mr. Spock would do." So it's like, whoa. But I saw that episode many years later in rerun, whatever, and that just popped out at me, and just, oh my God, they even back then they were referencing Star Trek.
Well, Taylor, you were put on the spot, but I'm going to put you on the spot as well. What did you think of these 3 iconic episodes, if I may say so?
Yeah, I love all 3 of these episodes. The episode with the Gorn, I love it. It's a really great episode. The only, it's not even a complaint, but the only thing I think they went a little strange on, I think they went a little too far in humanizing the Gorn. With the whole, maybe they were just trying to defend themselves. Maybe we were wrong. Okay, but they could have tried communication before they blasted that colony to bits and didn't even allow them to surrender. They didn't even try talking before they slaughtered all those people. So I think maybe a little bit too much humanizing there. But like as Spock said, that needs to be left to the diplomats. But anyway, great episode. Of course, Space Seed is a fabulous episode, and Ricardo Montalban was spectacular in it, as were many of the guest stars in Star Trek. Star Trek is like a who's who of guest stars. The great thing about 60s TV is you see the same actors show up in every show playing different characters, and Star Trek is no exception to that. And Ricardo Montalban was in many great shows. Man from U.N.C.L.E., for example, but he did such an iconic role as Khan, and of course it did give us some of that first history of universe building about how the eugenics wars happened in the 1990s on Earth.
Yeah, I remember that well.
Yes, I do. I think it was a little bit different, but yes. But yeah, great episode, and of course super memorable and a great character. City on the Edge of Forever. Now that's a biggie. And as Lord Deathman mentioned, they did not hold hands and sing Kumbaya in that episode. It's not everyone can win. We can save everybody. No, she has to die, and we have to kill a bunch of Germans and Japanese. Okay, that has to happen. Yeah. We can't stop it. Right? Someday in the future. Now, she was right, but she was too early. In the future, we'll be all peaceful. Well, really? When's that going to happen? Because I've been through 8 freaking series of Star Trek, and you're fighting wars in every single one of them. So when do we reach this peace period where there's no war anymore? All right. I realize on Earth it's peaceful, but every time you meet somebody else, the phasers start flying, it seems like. But
Well,
yeah,
there's
that
an
was
analogy there, but anyway.
yeah, that was quite I don't know what to put it. Very one of the themes of this show, of course, is logic and emotion, and the two finding the balance between the two. Spock and McCoy represents logic and emotion, and Kirk has to find the correct balance between the two. And in this particular episode, logic completely wins out. All right, she has to die, otherwise, our we don't exist, and our whole history is gone, and our crew is trapped on this planet without a spaceship to beam back up to. Right, so, and that it happened there. So again, three spectacular episodes. If we have time, I can mention a couple other episodes before we break. But yeah.
Yeah, I will indulge you, but I do want to mention Joan Collins being, of course,
yes.
in Edith Keeler. We wouldn't be reviewing this season if we wouldn't mention her. But anyway, I indulge you, and then I will close up.
Well, a couple episodes, I'll say one that I really love that doesn't get enough love. Well, it does get a lot of love in the fandom, but The Squire of Gothos. I love that episode. When I was a kid, WPIX Channel 11 out of New York would show Star Trek five days a week, and they would always show the commercials for the next upcoming episode. And whenever they showed that commercial for Squire of Gothos, I'm like, yes, because I love that episode. And the guy who plays Trelane, William Campbell, the actor's name is, and he shows up in a lot of shows. But before that, he had been very much typecast as a gunfighter in a bunch of Westerns, or a hitman, a thug, a tough guy. And to have him play this fruity, romantic, la-di-da character, saying all these flowery words and trying to show off, and wearing the blue coat and everything, he just had a ball doing that episode, playing that role, and he did so great. The other episode I want to mention, now this one, when I was a kid, this episode actually scared me. And even today, it's kind of disturbing. And that is the episode Miri, where they go to the alternate Earth where all the adults have died and it's just kids, but the kids are all slowly getting this disease that puts all these scars and things all over them. And that opening scene where that kid whose face is completely covered with all those growths and blisters and stuff is screaming and jumps down and attacks him. When I was a kid, that scene scared the heck out of me. And then even later on, some of the scenes like where Kirk is trying to talk to the kids and they start beating him with clubs and he can't fight back because he doesn't want to hurt children. That was a disturbing scene too. That was actually, I found that even today, I think that's a pretty powerful episode.
Yeah, absolutely. Lord Huffman, you had a follow-up.
Just a quick one. I also wanted to take just a really quick minute to mention some episodes out of this first season that I love that probably don't get a whole lot of, they don't get their flowers from the fandom. And maybe I could see why, but the last episode of that season, Operation Annihilate, where they have to go to this planet called Deneva, and they fight these parasitic aliens that killed, I believe it was Captain Kirk's brother.
Yeah.
and yeah, but that was like one of the first episodes of Star Trek where they actually had to go on a mission to like kill a thing permanently. And then just the name with the exclamation mark at the end of it always got me. I was like, oh wow, this is really serious. These are like the real bad guys, right? And I love Return of the Archons just because it is somewhat campy, but at the same time really scary in a way that it's kind of like almost a psychological horror episode about becoming part of a group mind. There are tons of them. I'll just name two more. The one where Kirk gets split into two people, I think it is called The Enemy Within.
Yes.
And Kirk gets separated into two halves. And I've seen, at that point, I've seen an actor kind of play alongside themselves using camera trick technology. They did it in like a Back to the Future movie. And I was like, okay, I've seen that kind of thing. So it wasn't just like the optical, technical aspects of the episode that made it great for me. It was the fact that Kirk was playing an evil version of himself and a good version of himself. And to me, that was like the greatest feat of acting ever. And I felt like everyone around him, everyone around me would be like, yeah, Kevin thinks they should get, they should get an award for that. And I really did feel like they should. So that being said, yeah.
I actually want to mention.
A couple of episodes.
I actually want to say that having rewatched season 1 now, William Shatner sometimes get mocked because the way he talks, but his acting skill is actually quite good, and it's fairly exaggerated by the fandom and by people how he talks and acts and stuff like that. I think no, I absolutely adored William Shatner in season 1. So Taylor, you also had a follow-up.
Yeah, just real quick follow-up. Operation Annihilate, it is Kirk's brother, George Sam Kirk, who's now a regular on Strange New Worlds, regular character on Strange New Worlds, who dies. But he is actually mentioned earlier in the episode. His first mention is in the episode What Are Little Girls Made Of?, where they're testing the android copy of Kirk to see if he has all the same knowledge, and he knows about his brother Sam.
Also a great episode, by the way.
Yeah.
Lokismom, you have the last follow-up, then I will close, because otherwise this review will last longer than the whole season 1 of Star Trek.
Okay, I will, and I will follow up. To piggyback on what Taylor One was saying about female power. There was a very, very powerful woman out in Hollywood, and then she was one of the producers of this TV show, and it was Lucille Ball. And she stuck with that show, I think, when they wanted to cancel it, and she and her husband Desi Arnaz stood behind it, and they put the money out for it. They liked what they saw, and of course they had a lot of TV shows back then also, but Star Trek was just one of them. And then of course they sold it to Paramount, made a lot of money, whatever. And now Paramount has a big old cash cow that they've been living on for quite a while now. So,
yeah.
But anyway, so hats off to Miss Lucille and Mr. Desi.
Yeah. Absolutely. May I? Yeah. Sorry.
I'm sorry. Grandmaster, were you about to close?
Yeah, I was, but
can I say actually just one more thing really quick? I just want to squeeze in one thing. It's very important.
Yeah. We cannot live without it. Come on.
I'm holding in my hand United States Army Field Manual FM 3-25.150 Combatives. This is the United States Army's manual on hand-to-hand combat. Chapter 4 is about advanced ground fighting, and it talks about various techniques: guillotine choke, arm lock, scissor sweep. And then the next one after scissor sweep is a move called Captain Kirk. This is like the end of Miracle on 34th Street. The United States Army, a branch of the federal government, has just proven that James Tiberius Kirk is the baddest MFer in the galaxy because there is a combat move named after him.
And with that, people, this review of Champions comes to an end. And that will conclude this month's episode of the Star Trek Project. We hope you have enjoyed our discussion today. I did. And if you did, you can help us out. Like and share this review and subscribe to our YouTube channel. And if you really want more of us, you can join us on our forum at sakar.freeforums.net. We would love it if you do that. For now, I want to thank you all, also on behalf of our champions, and wish you to live long and prosper.